Collaborate to Educate, or SONS, CEOS, is a nonprofit, multi-faith organization that seeks to help youth achieve full potential. The organization is built on a set of core values, including trust, character, faith, and service at the local, national, and international levels. We provide programs and services focused on training and mentoring young men, their parents, teachers, and mentors. We do this by conducting workshops, delivering valuable training and correspondence, and providing scholarships to deserving youth. We accept contributions for scholarships, workshops, and the online educational training platform we'll be constructing shortly. It is within this tradition that we have been sponsoring these town hall meetings, which are broadcast live on Zoom, Facebook, live stream. They are designed to assist parents and their students gain strength, strategies, and knowledge to cope in these unprecedented new environment. Let us begin with prayer, offered today by Miss Yolande Melbourne, a teacher at the Merimonte Christian School in San Jose, California.
Shall we bow? Dear Heavenly Father, we are so grateful and thankful to you for all that you have done for us. We thank you for the opportunity that CEOS has to reach out to its community, both near and far, to bring them opportunities for hope, to bring them a chance to have their voices heard, and to bring them an opportunity to hear from experts in areas where they need help. I ask that you please be with the discussion today, Lord. May it be beneficial. May it reach the ears of those that need it. We thank you for each of the participants and the roles that they will play. Please bless us now as we commune. In your name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. A few instructions for our audience. Everyone on Zoom is muted. Please do not unmute yourself without permission. Your movement, chatter, and activity will affect the quality of the broadcast. If you have a question or a comment, please use the chat function. If you have a question for our presenter, please write it in the chat and we will ensure that it is answered. The topic for today's town hall is mental well-being amid America's two pandemics. Today, we welcome back Mrs. Marilyn Crowther as our moderator. As you know, she's a board member of CEOS, and with Jackie Gales Webb, has been doing a superb job of moderating our town hall meetings. Welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Melbourne. I am looking forward to the discussion today. We have some amazing panelists with us today. I'd like to welcome Dr. Lennon, Dr. Andrews, and Pastor Williams. Let me tell you a little bit about our panelists today. Dr. Chad Lennon is a child and adolescent psychiatrist for Adventist Healthcare Behavioral Health and Wellness Services in Rockville, Maryland. He's a graduate of Howard University College of Medicine. He completed his residency in psychiatry at the University of Maryland, Sheppard Pratt, and his child and adolescent fellowship at Mount Sinai Elmhurst Hospital Center. We also have Reverend Dr. Gwen Andrews. Dr. Andrews is a social worker with specific experience in mental health. She's also the associate pastor at Belmont United Methodist Church in Richmond, Virginia, and assistant professor at Virginia State University. Pastor Lindell Williams is also with us today. Pastor Williams is an associate pastor at the Wheaton Seventh-day Adventist Church and chaplain at the Shady Grove Hospital. His specialty is mental health. I'd like to open with each of our panelists giving some opening remarks, and we'll start with Dr. Lennon.
Sure. Thank you again for the opportunity to join all you guys to do this. So as you mentioned, I am a psychiatrist. who works at Adventist Behavioral Health. I work specifically at an adolescent unit. I know this talk is going out to a lot of families and parents. Many of them I've had to, over the years, I've talked to many families and many kids on how to handle their anxiety and stress. Now, at this time, dealing with many different issues, not only COVID, but also a lot of the social issues that are going on with people of color. These are things that we're now as psychiatrists having to understand even more how to be able to talk with people about this. And so I'm grateful to have this opportunity to continue the conversation to help more families and kids have a better sense of how to handle all this stress and how to deal with different sorts of management of issues.
Thank you. Dr. Andrews?
Okay, I'm Gwen Andrews. I've been a forensics clinical social worker for about 38 years in the field. I can say as of an hour ago when I dealt with an acute situation that I've never witnessed such fear, anxiety, depression, and overall uncertainty because of the two pandemics. As I sit right now, I'm glad I'm a minister because I'm praying that what I just witnessed an hour ago will not turn into a tragic situation. So a lot is going on in the world, but we believe that God is with us and it's happening to a lot of Black and brown people. So I humbly just so grateful to be here to share because a lot is happening out in our world. Thank you.
Thank you. And Pastor Williams, will you also share some comments?
Thank you all for inviting me to this as well. I share some of the comments that both Dr. Lennon and our sister did share, but I like to bring you guys to a scene that I have experienced about 3 weeks ago. Of course, we know we're living in an unprecedented time. The pandemic is real, like this crisis is real. But I want you to just think for a moment what it may feel like when a patient who has mental health problems is being asked to by someone to go get the police to come and get them, to take them to get help in the hospital. Just think about that for a minute. Mental health, police, get, take to the hospital to get help. I tell you, it has been a tragedy talking with people throughout these past couple weeks because people are struggling with not knowing who to get help from and when to get help. And I'm glad we're talking about these things now because we can better prepare our young men to literally respond, how to respond to these situations versus reacting to them.
Thank you. And I can tell from the comments of each of you that it's a heavy burden because of your profession, but also because of where we sit as a group of individuals in terms of race. And today, our topic is your mental wellness in the midst of two pandemics. And one of the questions that our young people are asking is, how can racism be a pandemic, and is it on the same scale or level as Corona? And I would love for you guys to respond to that because we are experiencing two pandemics, and I'd love your perspectives on that question. We can start with Pastor Williams.
So it's really tough to cater to people who are struggling with one, being socially distant, right? Like socially, or let's say physically, they're distant, right? They are locked in their house. But also from the context that if they do come out, there's a possibility that they can be raided in a sense by the police. So a lot of my conversation so far with these, especially black boys in our hospital, and Dr. Lennon would have seen most of these patients anyhow, is how do we kind of like learn how to respond to what's happening and not react to what's happening? And we find it's very hard not to react, because oftentimes it's like they're always pushed against a wall, and they have to make that immediate decision as to what to do or not to do. And the best thing they probably can come up with could be the worst thing that eventually cause them to be dead. So I agree that in this time we're really between a rock and a hard place.
Dr. Andrews, would you like to add some additional comments?
Yes, I agree with my brother that they both are equal in terms of this pandemic, because the young men that we're working with here in Richmond, a lot is going on in the city of Richmond. But it's the question of manhood. I'm a Black male. I'm supposed to head my household, yet I'm grappling with a mental illness. So does a mental illness mean that I'm weak? And then you have the street that's saying you're weak if you're saying that you have some type of mental illness. So they're grappling with the economic situation of not being able to provide, and then I guess the criticism of even having um, a mental illness. What does that mean? And I think, as Dr. Lennon and Brother Williams will understand, we're the last to go get treatment, because we just think we can pray our way through. We can make sure that we can talk our way through. But that's the sad part, because in isolation, you're now reliving a lot of your past traumas and still trying to head a household. Um, and so it's a lot, and yet you're fearful to go out and seek because of what's happening on the street with the police officers and the way that they are being portrayed, rightfully so, in many situations. So you got problems at home, you can't go out in the street. And so the brother just said to me an hour ago, where do I go, Red? I have nowhere to go except you all are here to help me. But I don't want to put my hands on my wife, I don't want to hurt my kids. But he desperately needed help. But right now, with the things happening in Richmond, you can call crisis, but the first thing they want to do is call the police. Well, if we call the police, this brother may catch a charge and he's back in prison. So I'm caught between a rock and a hard place in terms of making a verbal contract with he and his PO. Just give me 24 hours so that I can get him in a hotel and get him settled. So it's real. It's real, because I don't want to see another brother in cuffs or taking their last breath.
Thank you. Dr. Lennon?
Yeah, I guess to go to your initial question of is this truly two pandemics? What we think of as sort of a definition of the pandemic, and thank goodness I have the internet so I can look at it. But how we think of definitions of pandemics are outbreaks, right? So, COVID in its own right is a clear outbreak of a medical problem that's going on across not only our nation but the world. As we're seeing also on the news, and even as we're talking about these things, racism too is an outbreak. It's something that's been going on for ever since at least many nations have been created. But what we're noticing now is this is a problem that people are becoming more aware of and becoming more insightful about. And so it has become sort of I'd say almost a sociological outbreak. Many people know these are things that already exist, but many people don't. So now it's a it's an amazing thing that some people are getting news of, so to speak. And the reason why that these two things are clashing, I mean, right to what Miss Andrews commented on, is that, and Mr. Enval is, we're trying to, Mr. Williams, we're trying to get to a point where how are you able to manage both of these two very severe outbreaks in one time, which what makes it so scary, because at one time, you're trying to manage the ability to handle the medical things that come with COVID. But on the other hand, you're trying to figure out the psychological and social issues that happen with racism, and how to manage both of these things at once is really hard. I mean, to take it even to another level, studies have shown that generational racism in its own right has caused a lot of medical problems. I
Mhm.
mean, we all know that people of color are more likely to have things like high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, and so a lot of people surmise that that too is because of how racism affects people. And that even goes to what we do around mental health, which we can always talk about. We can do that at another point, but talking about systems that are in place that are really hard to get into, that are also based on structural racism. And unfortunately, with the person that Miss Andrews is dealing with, that's a part of it, is not having a lot of options and a lot of places to go to, just because we haven't really done a good job, not only in our country but many countries, to make sure that everyone's getting the full opportunities of help.
When we say we're dealing with two pandemics, it's it's troubling because when you add, racism and COVID-19 with mental health issues, and you have an individual struggling and they don't want to appear weak, but they don't know where to turn because the one source that, you dial 911 when you're in trouble, but in today's environment, you can't necessarily dial 911. And a lot of the crisis centers, as you said, Dr. Andrews, their protocol requires them to do some reporting mechanism. What alternatives do people have today that are struggling with mental health, and with the protests and the racism and all the things that we're dealing with? Is there an opportunity for a coastal spiritual walk and to outreach to ministers and our church community?
I guess in just thinking in terms of outreach, I'll obviously let some of the other panelists talk about the spiritual opportunities and where to seek spiritual counsel. Um, One of the things that I forget who it was, but has been commented to me, is that a lot of these things are assisted with communication around as many people as you can. So, whether it be doctors or physicians that I think one thing that may sound really scary, but maybe a great opportunity until we get it fully fledged into our legal and police system, it may be very helpful if you happen to know a police officer or know someone that, and this a person, the person that you're worried about has mental health issues. If you happen to know someone in law enforcement, it may be good to reach out to them and say, hey, I have some concerns about XYZ here, and I wonder if they may need some help, and talk to them about sort of your concerns and all that that goes with them. So hopefully, whoever you'll be talking to will be more sympathetic to what you're dealing with, even though many of these protocols do require a police officer to come down. And it may even be good if you don't have a police officer that you know specifically, to call your local police department before anything even happens, and just communicate with, like, a head person there, whether it be a sergeant or someone who's typically involved in these mental health things, and just let them know, all right, I don't have a problem now, but I always wonder if XYZ, he's had some mental health things, and I want to make sure that if there's going to be someone who's going to reach out to him in a crisis, that it's someone he can trust. Obviously, generally, we always encourage people to contact.
Your
I
mic
got
is
muted there.
closed.
Yep, I saw it. Reach out to their counselors, their psychiatrists, whoever, and ministers, and make sure that that conversation is always being had, so that there's always an ability to really discuss any sort of uh, crisis intervention planning.
Absolutely. Communication is critical and key, and I don't think you can over communicate in this environment. Any additional comments?
I think, and maybe Dr. Lennon can speak to this or affirm it as well. I said I have been in the field 38 years. And why, to me, would you privatize insurance when you have not fully explained to the recipients all the ins and outs, the red tape of getting someone into a system when they already feel that they're at the bottom of the barrel? For instance, you have 6 or 7 private insurances. Most of the clients that we're working with are in public housing. Many of them have a limited education. And so they have no idea how to navigate those waters to get the insurance. And then the insurance companies can just drop a provider without even barely informing them. And as Dr. Lennon and all of us know, consistency and communication is key because you're already suspect of what's going on. So then to move them through a system from one provider to another provider to another. And the bottom line, because I prayed on this, is all about the almighty dollar. And the fact that it's costing, in terms of Medicaid. But to me, the privatization of the insurances has been a nightmare. We tried to work with our clients, but many of them want to stay with the same provider, but oftentimes they'll have to change doctors or providers because the insurance companies just drop them. And so, back to trust. If I can't trust them, I can't trust you. And also, here in Richmond, I've been able to uh, build a team because I used to be the chaplain for the Richmond Police Department. So as Dr. Lennon says, I have a pool of women interested enough that I can call who are police officers. And even though they're tiny like Reverend Gwen, when they step up and they have a certain demeanor about themselves, whatever this guy who's towering over, he sees us, even though we keep boundaries, as a mother figure, right? Little helpless woman. So I don't want to hurt her. So they can oftentimes de-escalate a situation more readily than a man who comes in and it's like, oh no, you're not gonna, take away my manhood, and they go toe to toe. Persons are very vulnerable when they're in a mental health crisis. They really are. And I think trust and consistency is very paramount. So I'm already writing letters advocating for my clients in terms of what is going on with this privatization of insurances because we vote for persons, they promise us things, and then they get in office and forget all about us. So, I want to bring it to the forefront and advocate for those who have no voice. Thank you.
One of the spiritual deficiencies that I think we face with a person who experiences mental health illness is loneliness. Oftentimes, people feel like they're alone. They are the only person going through this. And, in my groups, a lot of times we come to that conclusion, like when people are coming into the hospital, they feel alone. When they get there, and they get acclimated and they see that there are other people who are going through the same situation like they are, the mindset changes. I mean, drastically. And, one of the things I'm developing now as a chaplain, as I speak to you guys, is a concept. When you're sick physically and you go into the hospital, right? If let's say something happens to you, you're not going to be able to make it out and you're not sure, they give you an advance directive, right? And what that is really telling you that just in case you can't make a decision on your own, there's someone there to help you. And it's kind of the same empathetic look we give to people who are, if you have breast cancer or if you have, that kind of a person with mental illness, it's like totally different. So I want to develop what we call the spiritual advance directive. Like literally, who hopes for you when you can't hope for yourself? When you can't carry that hope for yourself, who's going to do that for you?
Beautiful. That we've got a question here that says, given that we are isolated, what should we be doing daily to help maintain our mental wellness? And how do we support our work colleagues and have some type of check-in system? And so that spiritual advanced initiative, can you say that one more time, Pastor Williams?
Spiritual Advance Directive.
Directive. And so if you could speak on, how do we put together a program where, with CEOS, we talk about 5 caring relationships. How do we have a spiritual advance directive where we know who is going to be praying for us and interceding on our behalf, and a system of check-in? Can you speak to that a little bit more?
So I'll say, oftentimes we may believe that the person closest to us is the person who will actually check in on us,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not true. It's like you have a friend and you expect, according to the definition of friend, this is what they're supposed to do, but when the time is right, they don't show up. That's kind of what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, we have to figure out how we can make that connection, whether it's inside our family. I'm not saying it can't happen inside the family, but wherever it is, that you're not going to become redundant. You're not going to become overbearing. You're not going to, because when that person hears you, no matter at what stage you are, you're actually being heard.
Wonderful.
I think when it comes to just generally maintaining well-being, the biggest things, at least that I've been reading about, is all about, as we mentioned, the continual communication and creating some sense of structure. So whether that means, and this works for adults or kids, is just trying to set up sort of, it doesn't have to necessarily be a written out schedule, but if that helps you, fine, but sort of just a really good setup of things that you're going to be doing during a certain period of the day. A lot of things are helped and mitigated just by the fact that the next thing that you're going to do. I mean, people who are anxious always comment that uncertainty is one of the biggest reasons why they become anxious. So that's definitely one thing I could say. Also commented about how to make connections with other people. I agree with Pastor Williams about trying to really make sure that loneliness is decreased and really making sure you know who those people are that you'll be contacting and who will be contacting you. Many people do this with, like, again, a scheduled sort of communication, like, at 5 o'clock every day, you and your friends are going to be meeting up for something, or, maybe on a weekly basis, that you're going to assume a family member or something like that. I think that's also going to be helpful, whether you do those via electronically or even, you know, in person, whether that means kind of meeting someone from afar. Like, there's always a big deal about nursing homes and who should be going in, but you could still make really good positive connections in any way, shape, or form, just to be able to maintain that positive connection and positivity.
If I could follow up a little bit, Dr. Lennon, thank you for, I guess, expanding on that. I talked with a patient today the patient is mentally ill, but the patient also have COVID. And so the existential question of why me, God, comes in. In fact, I must say that probably 95% of the patients that we see in behavioral health have some kind of relationship with God and probably don't want to have any relationship anymore, or pretty much felt like they messed up, which is where the guilt comes from, and God is punishing them. So Of course, one of our biggest supporter from a Christian perspective is going to be God. So we know it's important to have connection with God. And patient will always know how they'll comment at this is, I think this is happening to me because I stopped praying or because I stopped reading my Bible. So there's a lot of Bibles we give out to, and Dr. Andrews should probably know that as a chaplain. There's a lot of Bibles with mental health patient. Is like you see them next week, they need a Bible. The next week they need a Bible and always need a Bible. And I find out that it's important for them to be in communion with God, but at the same time, they have this guilt that, I think saturate them, and they can't find a way to get themselves out of it because the guilt is what keeps them numb. And acceptance is not something that sits with them well. Like the acceptance of God's grace, like, hey, you sinned yesterday, but God can forgive you and moved on. God is not holding anything over you or holding any grudges. A lot of patients are not able to do that. And we understand why at the moment. But once they get acclimated and, in days, we could be good and having conversation like, about God's justice, but also God's mercy towards them.
I guess to kind of piggyback on what has been said, at one point it was taboo to bring spirituality into the field of psychiatry. Um, and now it's good to see that we have instruments, like Pastor Williams is saying, where even clinicians can embrace spirituality. Because when nothing else can break the psychosis, oftentimes if they have some connection with God, you see a major change in their disposition. You even see their affect change. Working in this field a long time, I used to see clients and go, oh my gosh, he's like the Incredible Hulk. His eyes are changing. I mean, literally, because he's so out of touch. But then you would reach him through his religious base, and all of a sudden you would see things shift. He's still taking the medicine, he's still getting talk therapy, but now you've infused God in this. And so it does make a difference. And it has really helped strengthen this whole clinical psychiatric arena by infusing the spiritual component, because we all come here with the understanding that we didn't create ourselves. And I think with that, that has really been a major contributor to the calming of the waters mentally when you can infuse the spirit. So I'm glad to see that. Thank you.
So another question here is, we can become consumed with news and social media. As a young Black man, how do I stay informed? And how should I respond to people who don't understand why people are protesting and its effects on mental health?
I guess I could start a little bit with that. News can be used for a positive or a negative. And so I think the first step is to be able to make sure that you think about, one, a positive news source, and two, how much time you're using to listen to it. So, you don't want to be, if it's not something you feel comfortable with, you don't want to be inundated with that information all day long, because you can go to stations and be inundated with news 24 hours a day if you so choose. But definitely, if it's something that you find that's going to be more stressful than rewarding, that it's going to be important to really consider the news source, to make sure it's a trusted news source, and that you limit the amount of time that you spend with it. Now, as far as being able to communicate with people who may not understand what's going on in terms of how you view it as an African American, it there's going to be some people who truly understand where you're coming from, who are the same color as you or a different color as you. And unfortunately, there's going to be people who don't fully understand it. It's going to be, and that's what a lot of not only Black people in psychiatry, but Black people in general are really making a point to decide how much they're willing to have that conversation, because trying to help someone understand things can be, again, really rewarding or really taxing. And so you, as a African American or a person of color who's trying to help people understand these things, it may be more taxing than it is rewarding. And so you have to be mindful of how much energy you're going to be putting into helping someone else understand your struggle. Because the real thing, the most important thing, is how you understand your struggle and what you decide to do with your understanding. So all things, again, just like a diet, all things are good in moderation. You have to understand how much moderation you're willing to put into some of these things, so that it doesn't become taxing upon you.
And I think there's a need for a healthy balance, even with us. I can speak personally, just being inundated with CNN, and my family had to bring it to my attention, Mom, you're preoccupied with CNN. And even as a clinician, I was like, well, wait a minute, I need to step away, because feelings get connected to what you're seeing. And sometimes it ends up with your responding to persons in a way that ordinarily you wouldn't, just because. How dare you put your knee on somebody's neck? And then even your Caucasian friends who you've been all right with, you're cool with, all of a sudden these feelings may ebb up because of how you've been inundated with what you've seen on TV. So I think the happy balance is key, because everything that we see has an emotional connection. And so it's important to step away and just shut down and protect yourself, protect your psyche, because again, you can talk to people tell you blue in the face, but they still have their own preconceived um, you know, notions of what is going on. And so, again, you just have to, as Dr. Lennon and all of us are saying, you got to protect yourself and just kind of step away sometime and say, hey, look, I've tried, I've attempted, it's not going anywhere, but where is my psyche at this point? I have to protect my psyche.
I'm going to agree with Dr. Lennon and say time management is important, moderation is important, and it's definitely going to be the resources that you're looking at too is going to be important as to how you keep yourself abreast, but at the same time not overwhelmed with what's happening. But at the second point, I want to share that I'm a Black man who lives in America at this moment, but I'm not an African American. I'm Jamaican. And so a lot of things I really, really don't understand. Like I really don't. And so what I have to learn to do is to listen. I have to learn how to listen. Uninterrupted, that is. Bifocal listening, like not just the my ears, but my body language, how I'm coming off to these people. I have to also try not to be judgmental. You know, I don't know what the experience is, and I don't fully understand the experience. So how can I not judge these people as they share what actually happening in their lives or how they feel about things? And of course, I need to give people reassurance. There is hope. Amidst all of what's going on, there's a lot of things that are happening that are literal. We're progressing. It may not be on the speed that we're expecting or hoping, but progression is happening. There's a movement going on. And truth be told, if I can't manage what I'm hearing, I think it's too much. Just like if I'm going to support a patient or a person who is experiencing a mental illness, and if I'm not the psychiatrist, so I can't go give the information that Dr. Lennon would give. So therefore, I need to learn how to literally um, find a way to extend that person to somebody else. Find a way to help them, to create an environment where people can listen to them, where people can respond to them in a way that is going to be useful and not harmful to them.
Wonderful, wonderful. I've just captured some of your comments, and And I'll say the spiritual advance directive, the communication, making sure you have a daily routine and some structure, decrease loneliness and isolation, making sure we have a healthy balance, protecting ourselves and knowing our psyche, good time management, consuming news and social media in moderation, and listening are all very wonderful pieces of advice. Let me just take a step back and say, those are all the things we have to do once we know there's a problem, or as we prepare to not experience the problem, so much. But with this prolonged sense of stress and uncertainty that we spoke of, how do we tell when we're getting to the point where we need to add some structure, we need to pull back? What are there any telltale signs that say, okay, we need to pull back a little bit and we need to put some of these things in place? Um, any changes in behavior or any items we should look for to know that we need to reset?
I guess I could start off again. The biggest thing I know I look for as a clinician is a inability of function. And that could come about in many different ways. So, whether it's like quote more simpler behavior, their eating habits change, their sleeping habits change, um, things like their ability to concentrate or focus, especially for a student doing schoolwork. If those things are changing, energy changes. These things, when you notice some things that just on a simpler level, it seems like they're not able to function as well, you worry about that. You'll also worry about bigger levels of functioning. So even just being able to communicate with other people, if you notice there's something up with that, if they're not able to do well at work or at school, you want to worry about those sort of things. And sometimes a person individually can note that, like they'll know like something's up, something's a little off. I need to kind of talk through it with somebody, whether again it's a counselor, a psychiatrist, a pastor, a minister, whoever. But sometimes it takes what we talked about earlier, and that's having that other person who knows you really well, whether that be a parent or a really good friend who comes up to you and you say, I'm just noticing something's a little off. And, hopefully that person who comes to said person is someone, again, who is trusted. And they'll be able to take that in and not seeing as a judgment, but rather as a point of concern, and then can make it a point for themselves to seek whatever they need going forward. So again, whether that means they need to have someone to talk to, whether it be that person in that moment or a clinician or a person in pastoral care or a minister, or whether it means they have to go see a therapist, or whether they need to see someone like me, talk about things medically. But that first step is to always to be mindful about, is there something that is a little different? And whether you notice it or someone who knows you well notices it is going to be the first step.
From a
And
spirit, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Pastor William, go on. I'll follow you.
I was gonna say from a spiritual perspective, of course, if you know someone walk up to you and tell you, "Hey, I'm God," or "I'm God's son," or "I'm Jesus, I came back to save," or ultimately, you know that this is a person who needs help. I'll just say it and leave it there.
Or as Dr. Lennon says, this whole notion of family members or friends noticing some things, oftentimes the beauty of being a clinician in an academic environment is that oftentimes you pick up on signs and indicators that maybe other professors are not. the sad affect, the lack of sleep, the withdrawal, the giving away of precious items, the manic, then spiraling down. And again, all of these, as Dr. Lennon has said, this is against your normal functioning. And I think that persons in the household or friends or professors and others and pastors, um, that's why I think it's so important that we be aware of some of the signs of what is happening in the mental health arena, because even as pastors, you know I've had one come slam a note and invite me out to dinner, and he was just as manic as he could be. But the other, my co-pastor was like, "What is wrong with him, Gwen?" And I said, "He's fine. Let him have a seat. I'll address this after I finish preaching." But I think it would have been frightening, for someone who was not aware to say, "What is up with this guy?" And he walks in with a stick and a note. But again, there are signs, and yet you still have to treat these individuals with dignity and respect. Because again, when I said from the top, we're the last to want to seek and admit that we have a mental challenge. Then if I can't trust you once I arrive on the scene, then you won't get me in there again without the police and TDOs. And that's the scenario we don't want to have if we can prevent it. Thank you.
And I think the other thing I want to add to that is um, the curse of not of having to physically distance can also be a benefit to being able to understand each other better. Now that we have to spend more time in our homes, that could be a very good thing for families who maybe are always on the go, and now they're kind of quote forced to have to be around together a little bit more. It may give them a really good opportunity to kind of recalibrate and being able to look at each other and observe each other a little bit more, so that if they didn't have an understanding of these things before, now they can have an understanding of, how does my son react to anxiety? How does my daughter react to depression? How does my spouse deal with frustration? And now that you're all kind of together, it gives you that opportunity to really observe each other, so that as things move forward, whether, however long it's like this or when it lifts, you'll have a better sense of each other to prepare for those sort of things to happen and to use those observations to help you.
Mhm.
I hate to say, Doc, that there's a lot of patients I've met recent that are in the hospital because they can't deal with the other half.
So, Dr. Lennon, you've mentioned sleep habits, a change in your sleeping pattern, and we know that sleep is an important component of our overall wellness. Can we talk about some of the other components of wellness that have an impact on us physically and mentally? Some of the things that we take for granted, sleeping and eating well. Can you talk about wellness overall and the impact on mental health?
Yeah, sure. I think I don't want to miss what Mr. Williams commented on, that that connection to people could be a very fragile thing. And so it can sometimes work to your benefit and sometimes work uncomfortably. So, I've seen the same thing as he commented on, is people getting more anxious because they have to spend all this time with family. I think again that could be kind of a good thing to be able to understand with each other, of where those limits are, like, understanding how much time you should be spending with each other and knowing when it's time to give a little space. Now, to your question though, around other symptoms of wellness that can go awry. So, yeah, sleep is one of those. We've also commented and seen people changing in eating habits can sometimes change their energy level, how much they're able to do the things they need to do throughout the day and feeling comfortable with that. Or you may notice that some people, like Miss Andrews talked about, having their manic episodes where all of a sudden they have this really odd, uncomfortable burst of energy. Or you'll see people who are just tired all the time. Like they're not getting up, they're not motivated, they don't feel like doing anything. And again, it's all about looking for those changes in functioning. Obviously, extreme things are going to be really worrisome. So when you're getting into circumstances where they're thinking about hurting other people a lot or hurting themselves a lot, you obviously want to be really worried about that. And you also want to be worried, similarly to what Pastor Williams talked about earlier, those things that may seem really off in terms of delusionary sort of things, or seeing things and hearing things. So the gamut of things to look out for regarding wellness is quite a lot. But I think the things you want to look out for the most are those things that are sort of these changes in functioning, like they're not getting up like they usually do. They're not focusing like they usually do, not eating and not sleeping. Usually, when you see a bunch of those together, those are things you really want to try to reach out to someone to really connect to and get a better understanding of where that person is.
Now, another item is just making sure that any medications we are prescribed and should be taking, that we don't self-diagnose and decide we feel better and stop taking medication. One question we have here is, can folks get over mental illness without medication? And so I'd love for you guys to answer that question.
I don't mind starting there since probably I'm the one on the board who talks about medications the most. Yes, the answer is yes. Depending on the degree of the mental health issue. Obviously, if it's created a severe level of functioning, I talked earlier about seeing things and hearing things, having delusions of things, increased thoughts of hurting others, increased thoughts of hurting yourself. Those things you may need to reach out for a medication first. But some of the other things, actually, there's a lot of scientific evidence that a lot of other things help with that. So one, exercise. I'm working on my gut myself, but for all of us, there is a lot of evidence to show that, there's an increase of endorphins. I think Linville, I think we had this conversation a little while ago. Like, increased endorphins from exercise is great. So, if you even just go for a walk outside, if you can do that in your neighborhood, or if there's a park nearby that you guys can go to. I mean, social distancing can be hard for some people, but if there's a place that you can get a little bit of exercise, that is helpful. There's also the benefit of just talking to people. That whole concept of communicating with another person can be really helpful in working through some of the more milder issues that are going on. So whether that's reaching out to a really good friend that feels comfortable communicating about those things, I always suggest people see a higher level counselor, whether that means a social worker or a counselor, or a minister or a pastor that's comfortable talking about mental health things. I think those are going to be important pieces to work through. So yes, there are things that can be done outside of medication to help with mental health things. It's just going to be important for you to recognize when it just isn't going to do it, and you feel like it's becoming really burdensome and worsening, again, to that degree of really worsening loss of function.
Dr. Lynn, could you speak to a little bit of, excuse me, Miss Moderator, but I just want to throw this out at him.
We got two moderators on. All right, fair enough.
Right. So the mental health versus the mental health. So there's mental illness and there's mental problem, right? And the problem is what you're saying. There's possibly help, outside of medication that can help. Is that what I'm getting?
So I think what you're trying to talk about is that there's a degree of severity around mental health problems. So, we use the word problems kind of liberally, I guess would be the word. But I think the thing you want to think about is, again, it goes to that degree of difficulty with functioning. So if you're able to kind of manage through your moments where you feel kind of sad, or those moments when you feel really anxious or nervous and you're able to kind of work through those, then that's something where maybe simply exercise or just talking with someone more about those things would be of a great benefit. If you're sort of totally new to the field of working with someone on a mental health issue and you just don't feel ready to start on medication and you don't have any of those really severe things, again, thoughts of hurting yourself, thoughts of hurting others, seeing things, hearing things, if you don't have things to that degree, delusions, those severe degrees, then you can always start with just really talking with a therapist and really trying to make some plans around how to manage those things. And I usually tell people that as well. Like, hey, should I see a psychiatrist? No, you don't have to see us first. Obviously, there's less of us and we cost more. So I understand why people feel that concern. And always going to the therapist first is a great thing to just start that conversation. If you notice in the midst of that, though, that things are really bad and that's just not helping you, and again, those really severe things, that's when you want to reach and say, okay, maybe I need to talk to someone who does medication here to help me a little bit more.
And again, just to piggyback on what Dr. Lennon has said, um, for some reason, persons have this preconceived notion that medications are bad. Um, the fact is that you may not need it always, but at this moment, to kind of balance things so that you're more functional, you may need it. And it's not a, like he said, it's not a lifetime situation, but certainly at this moment in time, we're seeing that your functional is severe and you're having thoughts and behaviors that's way out on the scale. And so it's endangering you as well as potentially others. And even with understanding medications and the side effects and all of that, I think the more informed they are, the less some of the anxiety occurs. That this is not one in which I'm going to have tardive dyskinesia because I'm on it forever. But all of those things, we need to be forthright and honest with persons and understanding that at this particular time, at this particular season, I need the medicine in addition to the talk therapy.
I'll just say there's actually I'm glad I work with Adventist Healthcare because of how our interdisciplinary teams are set up. People, Dr. Lennon will call me, there's a patient who want to see you, you know, and what's most important is that whatever is happening in that person's life at the moment, there's someone there who can actually talk to that situation. And so I have cases where people said, I'm not taking any medication because God told me so. God told me not to take any medication. Dr. Lennon can't help, so the chaplain has to show up and help that person understand what this means and kind of track what God is saying and checking the realities with that person. So I'm grateful for the kind of team we have working with.
Okay, our flyer tonight had a big picture and it was entitled, to receive wisdom on how to navigate the new normal. Can you talk a little bit about what new normal looks like and if it's something that's going to evolve on a national level or if the new normal is an individual norm?
I'll let the other folks start with that one.
A new norm, walking around with a mask is a new norm in terms of uh, just navigating these waters. And when we talk about the wisdom of understanding the pandemic, and especially for um, Black and Brown people, the notion that the mask will be with us seemingly for a longer period of time. Um, and that is a part of a new normal. Um, the notion that, media tells us one thing, which is not as dangerous as has been conveyed, and therefore you can go out with no mask. So you're getting mixed messages. And I think the reality is understanding and reading and educating yourself that for a while this will be the new normal. And especially for persons who are struggling with mental challenges, they're most vulnerable because they're out there and they may buy into what they're hearing and seeing and not realize that this COVID-19 is real and it impacts us at a whole different level. We talked about medication. Dr. Lennon talked about high blood pressure and everything else. We are more vulnerable, and yet we need to use wisdom when it comes to this notion of what is this new normal. And nothing's wrong with masking up 6 feet to protect not only yourself, but others. And I think the more we can convey that and adapt and adjust, um, the better off we will be.
My son is making a lot of noise in the background, so I'm trying to weed him out.
I guess I'll start then while your son's trying to find his place in the world. Um, so the new normal, I think that's a conversation I actually have with people when they come onto the unit for the first time. Because because I work at an inpatient hospital, one of the things we have to think about is that their new normal is now going to have to figure out how to handle this mental health issue that they've never handled before. So we talk a lot about many of the things we talk about. Okay, how do you handle this thing that you've never quite understood before? We got to try to find coping skills, and if medication is the way to go, let's talk about how that's going to work. So that's for many people that new normal already to start. I think what'll happen now is now we're adding on some other pieces that are a little new and a little bit of a longer requirement of what we're going to have to kind of work through. And so, in the same way, shape, or form that when we talk about the new normal of how to handle a mental health issue is new, communication again is really important to be able to talk about this issue and be open and honest about how to deal with all these different things, and to be able to look at these things that may seem really, really weird, like a mask, like 6 feet, like how many people you have in a certain place at a time. Maybe people are used to going to restaurants more, and now they can't have to really think second about that. So all these things that are kind of different, it's just important to really talk through and really understand why all these things are changing, and to try to find a way, just like a mental health thing, about how to manage all these differences. I think the key is going to be, as we talked about at the beginning of the hour, is really about communication. It's going to be the most important thing, because things will constantly be changing. I mean, the only thing, what do they say? The only thing consistent in life is change. And so this is just a pure example of that. We're getting new information all the time about how to manage these things. It's just important to continue to talk about it, continue to understand, continue to learn, and not feel ashamed about those points when you're like, you know what, I don't know. We need to take some time and look it up and be open to just learning more and understanding more. I think that's what's going to help us figure out how to manage the new normal, not necessarily a specific thing and just get over it, but now use this opportunity to really feel like, okay, I really need to be engaged about communicating and learning.
So, you guys have provided some wonderful insights today. And Dr. Lynn and I have written down the only thing constant is change, because as a retired IT professional, that was one of the things that we were constantly adjusting to is changes in technology. But you know, when I think about the new normal, I think about every day as an opportunity to define what normal will be for the individual that given day, because communication and knowledge are going to be really critical to our success and well-being. Pastor Williams, would you like to? I'm going to ask each person to go around and make some closing comments. Um, would you like to do yours now, or would you like to wait a little while longer?
Enoch is eating. Let's see what happened. So, I really want to say thanks for, the new normal for me is conversation, right? And that's actually happening. And that's something that I'm grateful for. But I want to say that mental health for me is like the gospel. It's the good news. It's the good news of salvation, one says. That's what Pastor Melbourne would say. But I would say it is good news that recovery is possible. So there is hope for every single one out there who are struggling with a mental health disorder at a time. And with the pandemic, there is hope for those who are being hospitalized and those who are actually recovering. So we're grateful. I am grateful for an opportunity to be a part of these conversations during this time.
Dr. Andrews?
Well, I'm grateful too for the opportunity to sit with what I see as my colleagues, Dr. Lennon and Pastor Williams, because I think there takes a special person to enter this field. Sometimes my friends will say, Gwen, you're a little strange yourself. And I'm like, that's okay. But somebody's got to do this work. And I think you have to have a passion and a love for people and understand that they come to the table with a lot of concerns, a lot of broken pieces, and it's up to us to help mold and shape them along with their input into being as whole as humanly possible. The fact of the matter is, if all of us look back, starting in this field, it was 1 in 10 with a mental health. Now it's 1 in 5 or 4. That tells you something about what's happening in this world, in this environment. So, I love what I'm doing. I'm committed to it. And like I said, I thank God for the blessings He's bestowed upon me to infuse that spiritual component. Because sometimes you have to pray before you enter the room because you don't know what's going to happen once you're in the presence of someone who is grappling with a mental illness. But there is hope on the horizon. We've come from lobotomies, right, Dr. Leonard, to now active psychiatric medications, and it is helping a lot of people work in professional entities. There are persons who have mental health diagnoses that you all would never ever know that they have. And I am very excited about the possibilities of what the future holds for them. So thanks again for inviting me to be a part of this panel.
And I guess lastly would be myself. I just want to concur with the other panelists here, how grateful I am to kind of be a part of this. And I hope those who are watching will be able to take in any sort of information that'll be really helpful. I guess to sort of to close with all this, it is great to see that things that are happening, whether it be personally or externally, are always changing for the better. So, we're seeing this. We started this conversation with the concept of having two pandemics happening, right? So, both of those pandemics are actually moving towards a positive. No matter where you are in the country, even for those places that are having some spikes, they definitely weren't as bad as they were when it first started there. So there's always things that are improving. And then even in terms of kind of what's going on in terms of the protests and issues around race and culture, I think that too is sort of an opportunity as we're seeing for improvement because now many more people are being introduced to those things, these issues that they either didn't know really existed because they were kind of ignorant to the concept, and now they're being more aware, and people who maybe have felt like that they're the only ones dealing with this issue and no one really understands. Now they see that people not only in their own neighborhoods, people in their state, people in their country, and people in other countries are equally aware of these problems. So yeah, I would only have to agree that these things that are going on, these mental health problems, both the social pandemic and the COVID pandemic, are moving in a positive direction. So it's just around how much you want to work through these problems to benefit yourself and how much you want to work through these problems to benefit others. And I'm glad I'm in a field where we can work towards both.
Excellent. Thank you so much to each of our panelists. And Dr. Milburn, I'll turn it back to you.
You're on mute, Dr. Melbourne. Still on mute.
I'm sorry for that. I unmuted. I don't know what happened. I would like to thank our moderator and our presenters for their contribution to our knowledge, our physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being, and that of our men and families. Thank you for sharing your valuable time and knowledge with us. Thanks also to those working behind the scenes, Mr. Daly and Mr. Hines. Let me also thank you, the audience, for joining us. We couldn't have done these town halls without you. In addition to Zoom, this program was streamed and was live on Facebook. These are difficult times, and the prospects are not encouraging. But we are people of hope and faith who look for a better day that is not just a pie in the sky, but something we know is real. So this is a time of hope. This is also a time of prayer. Tennyson is correct. More things are wrought by prayer than this world dreams of. So keep on praying. Just an announcement or two before we go. You're invited to join us again next Tuesday, June 30, for our next town hall meeting. Secondly, there are 3 dates that I'd like you to note, 3 CEOS dates that are coming up. The closing date for the CEOS SS Scholarship Contest is at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on August 31, 2020. Go to collaboratoeducate.org to find the details. There will be 4 scholarships, 1 to seminary, 1 to college, 1 to vocational school, and 1 to high school. If you know someone who needs help in going to college or going back to academy, let them visit the website and apply for the scholarship. Secondly, Monday, September 14 is an important date. That is the date for the CEOS Golf Tournament. Plan to be there and to participate. Check our website for more information. And I'd like to introduce you to something that I have a special name for. This is my name. I'd like to invite you on October 11 to CEOS Banquizumatan. Banquizumatan. Mark the date and keep looking for details on this exceptional event to benefit scholarships for young men and to facilitate educational programs for boys, their parents, teachers, and mentors. I'd also like you to note that what CEOS has been doing is supporting boys and young men. If you like these town hall meetings, if you like the events of CEOS that you have been attending, like the special program for mothers, the special program for fathers, etc., and you'd like to contribute to the ongoing work of CEOS, you'll be welcome to do so. Just visit our website, CEOS, oh, I'm sorry, collaborate2educate.org. Collaborate2educate.org, and click the invest button and make your contribution. Again, I'd like to thank you for coming. Thank our moderator and our panel. I invite you to join us again next week. Until then, walk good, my friends. God bless. Thank you.